Hey! Don't move! Step away from the car right now!
Officer, this is my home. What's going on?
I asked you a question. You fit the description, and people like you always think you can talk your way out.
I haven't done anything
That's
wrong.
what you all say. Turn around before I make you.
You're making a serious mistake.
At 6:14 a.m. on a quiet Saturday in Alexandria, Virginia, inside one of the most exclusive gated communities in the D.C. metro area, a black woman stood alone in her driveway, loading luggage in the back of a silver Lexus SUV. Her name was Nain Ashford. She was 54 years old, and she had served as a United States federal judge for 11 years, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and assigned to a bench where she handled hundreds of cases involving constitutional law, civil rights, and federal criminal matters. That morning, she wore no robe and carried no gavel. She was dressed like any traveler. Yoga pants, a zip-up jacket, and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was heading to Dulles International Airport to catch a 9:15 flight to Chicago, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at a federal judicial conference on the future of due process in immigration law. Her carry-on sat at the curb, a garment bag hung from the rear door handle, and a travel mug of coffee rested on the roof of the car. Everything looked ordinary, just a woman leaving home on a calm weekend morning. But what happened over the next 11 minutes would ignite a federal investigation, destroy careers inside one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the country, and send shockwaves from a suburban driveway all the way to the halls of Congress. At 6:17 a.m., 3 unmarked black Chevrolet Suburbans turned onto Ashford Street and stopped directly in front of her driveway, completely blocking her vehicle. 6 agents in tactical vests stepped out in formation, IC printed across their chests. The lead agent was Craig Delano, 43, a supervisor detention and deportation officer with 16 years in federal law enforcement. Inside his field office, he was known for running aggressive operations, pushing limits other supervisors avoided, and for a trail of complaints from communities of color that had been filed quietly and never acted on. He approached Ashford with his hand resting on his sidearm, stance wide, jaw set. "Stop what you're doing. Step away from the vehicle." Ashford turned slowly, hands visible, one still holding a folded jacket. She looked at the agents, then at Delano. "Can I help you?" Delano didn't answer. "You match the description of a person of interest in an active immigration enforcement operation. I need to see identification now." Ashford set the jacket on the bumper, calm and measured, the voice of someone who controlled courtroom for years. "I'm Judge Nain Ashford. I'm a federal judge with the United States District Court. This is my home." Delano narrowed his eyes, glanced at the SUV, then back at her. "Sure you are." He tilted his head toward the agent behind him. "She's being evasive. Watch her hands." Ashford didn't flinch. "Do you have a warrant?" Delano replied, "I don't need a warrant. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." Her voice stayed level but firm. "Yes, you do. You're on private property. You have not identified a crime. You have not presented a warrant as a matter of law. You do not have authority to detain me." Delano stepped closer until his vest nearly brushed her shoulder. "I don't answer to you. Turn around now." Ashford held his gaze. "I'm asking you one more time. Do you have a warrant?" Delano said nothing. His hand moved from his sidearm to her arm. Across the street, a porch light clicked on. A curtain shifted in a second-floor window. An older man in a bathrobe stepped outside and stood motionless on his lawn, phone already raised. Neighbors were watching, and someone had already started recording. Agent Tara Schofield, 31, second in command, 7 years into a career built on never questioning the lead agent, moved behind Ashford and positioned herself at the judge's left shoulder, cutting off any retreat, hands already reaching forward. Delano grabbed Ashford's right arm and spun her toward the SUV, fast and violent. Her shoulder slammed into the side mirror with a dull crack that echoed down the quiet street. The coffee mug slid off the roof and shattered on the driveway. She didn't scream. She didn't swing. She planted her feet and said clearly, loud enough for every agent and every neighbor now stepping outside to hear, "I am a federal judge. You are making a serious mistake." Delano snapped back. "Stop resisting." She wasn't resisting. Her hands were open. Her body was still. Schofield seized Ashford's left arm and wrenched it behind her back. together. They forced her forward and pressed her chest against the hood of her own car, the metal cold from the morning air. Delano slapped the cuffs on and tightened them more than necessary. Ashford's cheek pressed against the paint. Her glasses fell from her head and clattered onto the concrete. From across the street, a voice cut through the scene like a blade. "That's Judge Ashford. What the hell are you doing?" The man crossing the lawn was Colonel Eldon Pratt, 68, retired U.S. Air Force, a 30-year veteran who lived 3 houses down from a woman he'd known for nearly a decade. He moved fast for his age, bathrobe open, slippers on wet grass, finger pointed at Delano. Delano turned. "Sir, get back now or you'll be detained for obstruction of a federal operation." Pratt didn't move. Behind him, through the front window, his wife was already on the phone with 911, voice shaking as she described what she was seeing. Without asking permission and without producing a warrant, the agents began searching Ashford's vehicle. No inventory sheet, no documentation. They opened the rear hatch, pulled out her suitcase, unzipped on the driveway, and went through her clothes, toiletries, and shoes. They opened her purse and dumped its contents on the hood beside her, wallet, keys, lipstick, glasses case, spread out in full view of the growing crowd. Then they reached her briefcase, a leather attaché with a combination lock. One agent forced it open. Inside were sealed federal court documents stamped with case numbers and classification markings, along with a judicial ID badge from the United States District Court and official credentials from the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts bearing her photograph, name, and title. Delano lifted the judicial ID, held it up, and stared. The photo matched the woman pinned to the hood. The name matched the name she had given. The seal was authentic. Schofield leaned in and read the credentials. The silence lasted only seconds, but everyone felt it. The truth sat laminated and embossed in Delano's hand. But instead of backing off, instead of uncuffing her and admitting what he'd done, Delano doubled down. He turned to his team. Finish the sweep. These could be forged. Ashford, still pressed against the hood of her own car in her own driveway, spoke with the weight of 11 years on the federal bench. "You are now searching sealed federal court documents without authorization. You have committed multiple federal crimes." At the back of the formation, the youngest agent, Kyle Rennick, 28, barely a year out of the academy, stood rigid, face pale. He leaned toward Schofield and whispered, "We need to stop." Schofield didn't look at him. Her jaw tightened. "Shut up." By then, 7 neighbors stood on sidewalks and lawns in bathrobes and slippers, coffee cups still in hand, phones raised and recording from different angles. Colonel Pratt remained at the edge of the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, speaking loudly to the dispatcher so everyone could hear. "I am reporting an unlawful arrest in progress. Federal agents have detained a sitting United States federal judge in her own driveway. No warrant has been presented. She is in handcuffs. I need local police here immediately." A woman hurried over from 3 doors down, cutting across the wet grass. She was Beverly O'Ae, 46, a tenured professor of constitutional law at Georgetown University Law Center and a published scholar on Fourth Amendment protections and federal overreach. She had known Nane Ashford for 6 years as both a neighbor and friend. She stepped onto the driveway and addressed Delano with the precision of someone who had argued before appellate courts. "I know this woman. She is a sitting Article 3 federal judge appointed under the Constitution of the United States. You are violating federal law. Uncuff her immediately." Delano faced her, jaw tight. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. Leave now or you will be placed under arrest for interference with federal operation." O'Ae didn't move, not one step. She held her phone steady at chest level. Camera pointed directly at Delano's face. "I'm a constitutional law professor at Georgetown. I'm not leaving, and neither is my camera." Schofield shifted behind Ashford, glancing at the growing number of recordings. For the first time, something changed in her posture. Not guilt, not conscience, just the awareness that the ground under this operation had already collapsed. Delano walked back to the lead Suburban, pulled his phone from his vest, and dialed. From the neighbor footage, he could be seen pacing in a tight circle, rubbing his forehead, gripping the back of his neck, voice rising though the words weren't fully audible. He was calling his field office supervisor. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When he returned, his face was different, still aggressive, but now layered with damage control. He unlocked the cuffs without explanation. No apology, no acknowledgement of the credentials or the sealed documents scattered across the trunk. He stepped back and said flatly, "There's been a mix-up. You're free to go." Ashford straightened slowly and rolled her shoulders, wincing as her left one moved. The bruise from the side mirror was already darkening beneath her jacket. She looked at her wrists. The cuff marks were deep and red, pressed into her skin like brands. Her cracked glasses lay on the concrete. Her suitcase sat open, clothing spilling out. Her briefcase had been forced open, and sealed federal documents lay fanned across the trunk, exposed to the morning air, and every camera still recording. She looked directly at Delano, voice steady, controlled, unmistakable. This was not a mix-up. This was a choice. Then she pulled out her phone and began recording. She panned across the scene, the cuffs on the ground, the scattered documents, the 6 agents standing in a loose formation, avoiding eye contact, the 3 black SUVs still blocking her driveway, the neighbors lining the street. She narrated with practiced clarity, understanding the power of a record. "My name is Judge Nate Ashford. I am a United States federal judge for the Eastern District of Virginia. Today is Saturday. It is approximately 6:30 a.m. I was detained in handcuffs in my own driveway by agents of immigration and customs enforcement. No warrant was presented. No probable cause existed. I was not told what crime I was suspected of. My vehicle was searched. Sealed federal court documents were handled without authorization. I was arrested in my own driveway because I am black. Within 30 minutes of the SUVs pulling away, the calls began, fast and in every direction. Colonel Eldon Pratt, still in his bathrobe, dialed a friend he had served with decades earlier who now held a senior advisory role at the Pentagon, and he described what he had witnessed from his lawn. Controlled but furious. They cuffed a federal judge on the hood of her own car. No warrant, no reason. She told them who she was, and they didn't care. Beverly O.A. sat at her dining table and called the dean of Georgetown Law, delivering a precise summary of the violations she had witnessed and stating she would file formal statements with every relevant oversight body before the end of the day. 2 streets over, a neighbor named Franklin Yates forwarded his phone video to his daughter in Maryland, a junior editor at the Washington Post. She watched it once and took it directly to her supervising editor. Judge Ashford sat in her living room with an ice pack on her shoulder and called the chief judge of her circuit, speaking with the same precision she had used on the bench for 11 years. "I was just arrested by IC in my driveway. I was cuffed, searched, and humiliated. There was no warrant." The chief judge placed one call to the administrative office of the U.S. courts. The administrative office contacted the Department of Justice Inspector General. The DOJ contacted the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General. DHS contacted ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility. Each call was shorter than the last, each carrying more urgency. By 8 a.m., less than 2 hours after Delano stepped out of the Suburban, the machinery of federal accountability was in motion. Back at the IC field office in Fairfax, Craig Delano sat in a windowless room and typed his incident report. His version of events didn't match the driveway at all. He claimed he encountered an uncooperative individual who refused to identify herself and physically resisted agents during a lawful enforcement action. He described the subject as combative and said the force used was necessary and proportional. He framed the detention as routine. He mentioned nothing about the judicial ID, nothing about the sealed court documents, nothing about the 7 witnesses, and nothing about the cameras. He filed a report at 9:47 a.m. and flagged it as a standard field encounter requiring no further action. Tara Schofield read it, added her electronic signature without objection, and returned to her desk. Then Delano carried the document to Kyle Rennick. The youngest agent sat near the back of the office, jacket still on, hands clasped between his knees, silence since returning. Delano placed the report in front of him and pointed to the signature line. Rennick read it, his eyes stopping on the claims, then looked up. That's not what happened. Delano leaned in, voice low enough to keep it between them. Sign it or your career is over. Rennick looked at the report, looked at Delano, and signed. But that night, alone in his apartment. Kyle Rennick called the DHS Office of Inspector General Anonymous hotline. Quiet but steady, he identified himself by badge number and reported that Delano's incident report was fabricated. Every material claim false. He said the subject had been compliant, had clearly identified herself as a federal judge, and had been cuffed, searched, and humiliated without a warrant or probable cause. He said he would cooperate with any investigation and asked for one thing: whistleblower protection, because the man who told him to sign the lie was the same man who put a federal judge in handcuffs that morning, and Rennick had seen exactly how far Delano was willing to go. Monday morning at 8 a.m., the DHS Inspector General formally opened an investigation into the detention of Judge Nate Ashford. By 8:30, the DOJ Civil Rights Division assigned attorneys to the case. By 9:15, the FBI was brought in. The reason was simple. Federal judicial officers are protected under federal law. Assaulting or interfering with a sitting federal judge is a crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 111. Threatening or retaliating against a federal judge is a crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 115. This wasn't internal affairs. This wasn't a policy review. This was a criminal investigation. FBI agents arrived at the IC field office in Fairfax before lunch with subpoenas and forensic technicians. They seized body cam footage from every agent on the team, pulled GPS data from all 3 Suburbans, copied radio communications from that morning, and took Delano's operational planning documents, the targeting files, address lists, authorization memos, and every paper trail that was supposed to justify the operation. What they found reshaped the entire case. There was no warrant for Nate Ashford, none for her address, none for anyone at that address, none for her street. The operation that morning was targeting an individual in a neighboring zip code more than 2 miles away, in a different subdivision, on a different street with a different name. Ashford home had never been part of any authorized federal action. Delano had gone the wrong street, and instead of verifying, pausing, or checking the file, he saw a black woman in a driveway and decided she was a target. Over the next 48 hours, FBI digital forensics recovered and cataloged body cam footage from 3 agents, including Delano's and Schofield's. The footage was time-stamped, geotagged, continuous, and it showed everything. It showed Ashford turning slowly with hands visible. It showed her calm identification as a federal judge. It showed Delano scoffing. It showed him grabbing her arm and spinning her into the side mirror. It showed Schofield wrenching her other arm behind her back. It showed them pressing her face against a hood and cuffing her as she repeated, clearly and without hysteria, "I am a federal judge. You are making a serious mistake." It showed her stillness, full compliance, without a single movement that any force expert could label resistance. It showed the agents tearing through her vehicle without consent, without a warrant, without documentation. It showed Delano holding her judicial ID, reading it, pausing, and then ordering the sweep to continue. It showed sealed federal court documents pulled from her briefcase and spread across the trunk. And it captured the moment that would become the most replayed clip in the investigation. Kyle Rennick leaning towards Schofield and whispering, "We need to stop," and Schofield whispering back without turning her head, "Shut up." Every frame contradicted every line of Delano's report. Every claim of resistance was false. Every claim of combative behavior was fabricated. The neighbor videos, 4 separate angles recorded across the street, matched the body cam footage frame by frame, word by word, second by second. A senior FBI analyst reviewing all 7 recordings synced to a single timeline wrote one line in the official case file that would follow Delano for the rest of his life. This was one of the clearest cases of unlawful arrest, excessive force, and false reporting he had seen in 22 years of federal law enforcement. ICE leadership moved quickly, but not quickly enough. By Monday afternoon, Craig Delano and Tara Schofield were placed on immediate unpaid suspension. Their badges were confiscated, credentials deactivated, and access to federal systems revoked. The Fairfax field office director, a 22-year veteran named Leonard Stokes, was quietly reassigned to an administrative role at a regional processing center, removed from command without public explanation. ICE and DHS drafted a joint statement, revising it repeatedly as lawyers argued over every phrase, trying to express concern without admitting liability, to acknowledge the incident without conceding wrongdoing. They planned to release it Wednesday morning with carefully controlled timing. But the internet didn't wait. Tuesday evening, one neighbor video was uploaded to social media by the daughter of Franklin Yates. It was 2 minutes and 47 seconds long, showing the cuffing, the search, the scattered documents, and Judge Ashford's voice as clear as a courtroom ruling, "I am a federal judge. You are making a serious mistake." Within 12 hours, it had 4 million views. The headline spread everywhere. On every network, news site, and front page, ICE agents cuffed black federal judge in her own driveway. No warrant. By Wednesday morning, 3 members of the Senate Judiciary Committee publicly demanded hearings. The committee opened a formal inquiry. By Thursday, the Congressional Black Caucus held a press conference on the Capitol steps, calling it a grotesque abuse of federal power rooted in racial profiling. The Chief Justice of the United States was briefed privately by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. And then something rare happened. The federal judiciary, usually silent outside the courtroom, released a formal statement. 3 sentences. It called the arrest of Judge Ashford an attack on judicial independence and a violation of the constitutional separation of powers. It demanded full accountability from every agency and individual involved. And it warned that the courts would be watching. 8 weeks later, a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia returned indictments. The charges against Craig Delano were sweeping. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, for detaining, cuffing, and searching a sitting federal judge without warrant, probable cause, or legal authority. Assault on a federal officer, 18 U.S.C. Section 111, for the physical force used against an Article 3 judge. The grab, the spin into the mirror, the compression against the hood, the cuffing, falsifying federal records, 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, for filing a report fabricated from start to finish, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, 18 U.S.C. Section 1512, for pressuring a subordinate to co-sign a false report and attempting to construct a fraudulent official record to conceal what happened. Tara Schofield was charged with conspiracy, deprivation of rights, and falsifying federal records. The grand jury found she participated in the unlawful detention, used physical force against a compliant subject, co-signed a report she knew was false, and actively silenced an agent who tried to intervene. Kyle Rennick, the 28-year-old who whispered, "We need to stop," and called a hotline that night, was granted full immunity as a cooperating witness. He testified for nearly 3 hours, describing the stop, the cuffing, the search, the moment Delano read the judicial ID and chose continue, and the pressure to sign the false report. He quoted Delano's words exactly, "Sign it or your career is over." 2 additional agents were named as unindicted co-conspirators for participating in the warrantless search and failing to intervene during the use of force. The field office supervisor who took Delano's phone call from the driveway was placed under separate investigation for failure to act because investigators wanted one answer. What did Delano say on that call? And why did it take a supervisor's phone conversation for anyone to uncuff a woman who had already identified herself, shown credentials, and told him exactly who she was? The trial began on a Monday morning in the federal courthouse in Alexandria, the same courthouse where Judge Ashford had presided for more than a decade. She wasn't on the bench this time. She sat in the gallery, watching the system she had served attempt to hold accountable the people who had violated it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution opened with the footage, Delano's body cam, Schofield's, and a third agent's chest-mounted camera capturing a wide angle of the driveway. They played all 4 neighbor videos synced to a single timeline on a screen large enough for every juror to see every detail. The courtroom sat silent as 12 jurors watched a federal judge in yoga pants get spun into a side mirror, pressed against the hood of her own car, and cuffed in her own driveway while calmly identified herself over and over. They watched agents tear through her luggage. They watched sealed court documents spread across the trunk. They watched Delano hold the judicial ID in his hand and order the search to continue. Kyle Rennick testified on the 4th day, describing the operation from the inside. The moment he realized there was no warrant, the look on Ashford's face when the cuffs clicked, the whisper to Schofield, and her response, "Shut up." He described sitting in the field office afterward, reading the report Delano had written, knowing every word was a lie, and hearing Delano lean in and say, "Sign it or your career's over." His voice broke once. He paused, breathed, and continued. Beverly O.A. testified as both legal expert and eyewitness, walking the jury through the constitutional violations in clinical detail, and then describing what she saw in language that wasn't clinical at all, a woman who had dedicated her life to law being treated like a suspect by men who didn't care what she said or who she was. Colonel Eldon Pratt testified in a press suit, speaking in clipped military cadence, describing crossing the street in slippers, being threatened with detention for obstruction, and the look in Judge Ashford's eyes with her face pressed to the hood. "I have seen men and women in combat zones," he said. "I have never seen someone maintain that kind of composure under that kind of humiliation." Then Judge Ashford took the stand. The courtroom went still. She described the coffee on the roof, the garment bag, the sound of the SUVs, the moment Delano grabbed her arm, the impact against a mirror, the cold metal of the hood, the tightness of the cuffs, and the sound of her glasses hitting the concrete. She described fear unlike anything she had experienced on the bench. Fear that lived in the body, not the mind. She described the humiliation of seeing her clothes pulled from her suitcase and spread across her driveway. She described watching a man hold her judicial ID, read it, and decide it didn't matter. And then she spoke the words that would be quoted for years in newspapers, legal journals, and civil rights filings. "I have spent my career upholding the Constitution. That morning, I learned how it feels when the Constitution fails to protect you." Delano's defense argued good faith, wrong address, high pressure, rapidly evolving situation. They called it an honest mistake under difficult conditions and said the force used was consistent with enforcement protocols. The prosecution dismantled that in one afternoon. "If this was a mistake," the lead prosecutor said to the jury, "then why did he write a report claiming she resisted? Why did he claim she was combative? Why did he pressure a junior agent to sign a document he knew was false? A mistake is going the wrong address. A crime is what you do after you realize you went the wrong address and decide to lie about it." The jury deliberated 6 hours and returned on a Friday afternoon. Craig Delano, guilty on all counts: deprivation of rights, assault on a federal judge, falsifying federal records, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Tara Schofield, guilty on conspiracy and falsifying federal records. The courtroom stayed silent as the verdicts were read. Delano stared ahead. Schofield closed her eyes. In the gallery, Judge Ashford sat motionless, hands folded, expression unreadable. 6 weeks later, at sentencing in the same courtroom, Delano stood before the bench in a Navy suit. No badge, no tactical vest, no sidearm. The man who once told a federal judge, "I don't answer to you," now stood with his hands clasped, answering to a federal court. The sentencing judge did not mince words. He told Delano he hadn't merely made a mistake. He had targeted, brutalized, and then lied about a sitting federal judge, searched her vehicle without a warrant, handled sealed court documents without authorization, filed a report fabricated from beginning to end, and threatened a junior agent for trying to tell the truth. "You did not act in good faith," the judge said. "You acted with arrogance, with impunity, and with a belief that your badge placed you above the very laws you swore to enforce." Craig Delano was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Tara Schofield received 3 years. The judge noted that while her conduct was less aggressive, her willingness to co-sign a false report, her active silencing of a fellow agent, and her failure to intervene made her equally culpable in conspiracy to cover up the truth. Neither defendant apologized. Neither looked at Judge Ashford. Within weeks of the verdict, Judge Ashford filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security, IC, Craig Delano, Tara Schofield, the Fairfax Field Office, and the supervisory chain that enabled the operation. The lawsuit alleged unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling, Fourth Amendment violations, and interference with a federal judicial officer. Discovery revealed internal communications, operational failures, and a documented pattern of complaints against Delano's unit that had never been acted on. Government attorneys reviewed the evidence, footage, verdict, public record, and recommended settlement. The case resolved before trial for $4.6 million, one of the largest individual settlements in a federal civil rights case involving law enforcement. But the money wasn't the real headline. The settlement imposed mandatory reforms on the Fairfax Field Office and established them as a model across the agency. independent civilian oversight of enforcement actions involving residential addresses, revised protocols requiring warrant verification at every stage before contact with any subject, quarterly anti-bias training administered with external review, a prohibition on enforcement actions at any address not explicitly listed in operational authorization, and a requirement that incident reports be independently reviewed within 48 hours by personnel outside the reporting chain. The reforms didn't undo what happened, but they made it harder for it to happen again. Craig Delano reported to a federal correctional facility in Cumberland, Maryland, carrying only a single bag of approved items. His career was over. His federal pension was forfeited. His name entered the Bureau of Prisons database permanently. Tara Schofield was barred from federal employment for life and lost her security clearance. She had built her career on never questioning the person above her, and that silence cost her everything. Leonard Stokes retired under pressure without ceremony. 2 supervisors were formally demoted for failing to act on prior complaints about Delano's unit. Kyle Rennick was transferred to a new field office and 6 months later received a formal commendation from the DHS Inspector General for integrity under extraordinary pressure. He never spoke publicly. He didn't need to. Judge Nain Ashford returned to the bench. She declined interviews and book deals, but 6 months later at a judicial conference, she stood at the podium without notes and spoke plainly. The law failed me that morning, but the people did not. My neighbors came outside. A retired colonel crossed the street in his bathrobe. A law professor stood on my driveway and refused to move. A young agent with everything to lose made a phone call that changed the course of this case. She later established the Ashford Justice Initiative to fund legal defense for victims of unlawful federal enforcement actions. A training module based on the incident was adopted by DHS, DOJ, and Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, including the full body cam footage, the false report, and Rennick's testimony. On the final slide was a photograph of her driveway, handcuffs on the concrete, sealed judicial documents scattered, 3 unmarked Suburbans blocking the path of a woman who had done nothing but exist in her own home. Beneath it, in plain black letters, this is what happens when power operates without accountability. Now, watching footage like this can really stick with you, right? Some clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, if you're someone who lies awake at 2 or 3 a.m., mind racing, unable to shut off, you already know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain won't stop. And the worst part is the less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood takes a hit, and everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with that for years. I tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk. Nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 30-Day Uninterrupted Sleep Reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that retrains your brain to sleep through the night 7 to 8 hours uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system, and once you're done, you keep the results. There's also a maintenance plan, so you don't slip back. If you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it, and I'll catch you in the next one.